let's talk about how China once viewed the world in the past. And in the past, if you don't know, who led China were many, many emperors and kings. And part of the view that China had in the past, before they had satellites, before they knew about the entire world, they believed that the Chinese emperor, their own emperor, was the leader of the whole world. Even the world they haven't met, even everyone. And they also believed that China was the center of the universe. In other words, not just the center of Earth, but the center of all places anywhere in the heavens. So they firmly believed it. And by the way, if you look at maps, I don't know if someone looked at a map recently that China makes of how they look at the world, you'll see that China is on the left side and not America. Because until this day, they still see the world geographically as being centered on China. And that comes from this time. So the people too, and above all, they believed there were two types of people in the world. There were Chinese people, and there were those who were not yet Chinese people. In other words, the Chinese aimed to not just increase their power, but to make sure those who are not Chinese, who are not someone who identifies with their culture, with their policies, those people will assimilate and in the end become Chinese themselves. So it was either fight them or join them. So the Chinese view the world as someplace close to their heart and as someplace they led and were dominating above all. So that was the past. And the current view of the world, which came to be after 1949 when the Communist Revolution under the leadership of Mao Zedong came about on October 1st, 1949, when the Communist Party of China took power. This changed the way they saw the world. And one of the things which has been ever since with the Chinese, since 1949 till this day, 2020, has been the importance of territorial integrity. They are very, very adamant about making sure that any place geographically, and we saw the map, that once belonged to China or belongs to China now remains in Chinese hands. That's the reason till this day they have issues with Taiwan. They call Taiwan a breakaway province, that island where the Kuomintang, the nationalist party that ran away from China after the communists won, that's where they ran away to. And although they're very much acting independently ever since they moved there in 1949, the Chinese continue to say that they are a renegade province and that any move that they do for independence, they will use force to make sure Taiwan comes back to China. So the Chinese are very, very adamant of looking and feeling that all their territory, every piece of sand, every piece of rock, always remains with them forever. The next thing that they also view the world on this basis is the importance of national sovereignty. The importance of the fact that they don't want anyone telling them how to run their internal affairs. We don't want anyone telling them about democracy, about what they should do or not do with regards to the coronavirus. They don't want any sort of infringement on their national sovereignty, either both in terms of their own territory, when it comes to their embassies worldwide, their businesses. They're very much in belief of safeguarding their sovereignty above all costs. And this brings forward the third major view of the world, and that is that the Chinese are always guarding against any internal interference and any internal intervention. So if the world thinks about talking to someone in China, talking to some ethnic group in China, talking about Tibet, talking about Taiwan, talking about Hong Kong, that issue that's happening right now, talking about the virus, the Chinese will make sure that doesn't happen. They will censor it. They will arrest anyone who's involved. And above all, if they find anyone in the country who currently is trying to cause instability, to push for some sort of democracy or whatever it is, they will come to the conclusion that that person has to be controlled and is being controlled by an outside force. And that means, again, if something happens against the Chinese Communist Party, sure, it could be a Chinese person doing it, but he's getting orders from someone on the outside, because according to the Chinese are always patriotic, always supporting this view, and if they're doing something otherwise, there must be someone else who's helping them. And that's another major fact which is always in the minds of the Chinese. Now, if we look at important events, and there have been many events, there are a few events which I think we should focus on in trying to understand where China is today. And as I mentioned before, the People's Republic of China was founded on October 1st, 1949. That's when their leader, Mao Zedong, who led the country until 1976, he proclaimed a communist revolution. That came about, again, through a civil war in China between the communists and the nationalists. And this also was taking effect even during World War II. And after World War II, when there was no longer this common Japanese enemy, they found themselves as enemies to each other once again. And in the end, Mao Zedong and his Red Forces, they won the day. And from that day until 1972, when Richard Nixon, the US president, came and visited China, until that day, we can say that China was pretty much isolated. Didn't talk to anyone. Focused on itself. And in 1979, Richard Nixon made a major decision to go to China and to try to open up China, not just for the United States, but for the world. Major, major event. I actually very much recommend everyone here to go online, try to find, there's a very good documentary that was released by the Richard Nixon Presidential Library in the United States, which talks about this trip. This was a very big trip. They didn't know anything what to expect. They didn't know if they would meet Mao Zedong, what will happen. Excellent documentary. So Richard Nixon talked about how he's doing this, not just to change how America views China, but to change how the world views China. And after Mao died in 1976, we had another person come to power by the name of Deng Xiaoping. And in 1978, after the Mao regime was no longer there and Deng Xiaoping was the leader, he introduced major economic reforms. You can say that 1978 was the day that the Chinese people, the Chinese economy opened up to the world.